So in this video, I want to talk about my experience of being a contrarian. Why I like to debate people, why I like to disagree, and so forth. So, this has been such a strong strand in my personality that literally when I was growing up and I would hear one opinion, I would try to find things that I could disagree with it over. Like I wanted to play devil's advocate or just say whatever I could in order to have a conversation about the thing, because the act of having the conversation was way, way more interesting to me than defending the positions which I authentically held, which I didn't really know what were in a lot of cases, and I was aware of that. And so I wanted to have these kinds of discussions. And in retrospect, I think it was inspired by the fact that, my parents, both of them were big arguers, big debaters with people that they knew around where we lived at the time in Tennessee. Both of them atheists, both of them liberals, and had very strong views on a number of issues that were totally different from the people that they were spending time with. And so, of course, I saw these heated discussions that ended in everybody still being friends after getting so mad at each other and just hanging out and enjoying one another's company. And in retrospect, I can't help but feel like that had an impact on me. Like I couldn't help but be influenced by it, right? And so I look at myself now and my tolerance of other views, tolerance which is so grand, so great, that I'm willing to actively take on those views facetiously, like not in a serious way, but just to explore the ideas, as a sign of just how big that tolerance is. And it's an interesting thing, right? Because like I want to try and be as objective as I can, even though I know true objectivity from any one individual is impossible. Like we're always going to have biases, we're always going to have things that make us susceptible to propaganda or bad thinking, these sorts of things, but you try to fight it the best you can. And I think by attempting to steelman the other side's positions, whatever side it may be, and find evidence to affirm their case and actually argue on their behalf, talk to people as though you believe those things, this is going to make you better at arguing for things that you actually believe, and it's also going to make you more empathetic to people who disagree with you, because you're not just actively humanizing them, you are respecting the intellectual rigor which has gone into the development of their ideas, which is super important, right? If we're all to get along with each other. And I think that's a desirable goal, because ultimately there are far more things which bind us together than things which separate us. So I look at the current cultural climate where people feel the need to fight and break up families and friendships over these sorts of issues, and I can't help but feel like this kind of contrarian approach to conversations would be super useful if all of us just engaged in it, at least a little bit, right? Without even like taking on positions for theoretical, experimental purposes. You could just ask questions, right? I mean, that's what Socrates did when he was debating people. Famously, he would just ask questions until the person had changed their mind themselves, or if not changed their mind, but began really questioning some of the fundamentals which underpinned these perspectives that they had. And I think that's a good way of going about it. Non-judgmental, just kind of, asking, pointing out logical flaws in the arguments without doing it so directly or pushing, just kind of alluding to it and allowing the person to come up with the problems themselves through use of these questions. I mean, that's the Socratic method, right? At least one of them. And that guy was definitely a contrarian. He might have been the original contrarian in retrospect. But yeah, this is kind of what I'm trying to say, is that I think having that mindset is good. It's not always good, right? Like, if you're always trying to debate people over every little thing, if you're always trying to disagree over every little thing, you're not going to be liked by very many people. You're not going to be likable. There are settings in which it's appropriate, and there are settings in which it is not. And so you have to be able to read the temperature of the room in order to engage in those sort of discussions, and preferably with people who actually like to have these sort of long-winded discussions. You don't want to just throw it at any random person, especially if they're not particularly good at debate, because what are you going to get out of that? Are you going to learn something? Are they going to learn something? No. You have to, be talking to somebody who's actually interested in these sort of conversations. Otherwise, you're just being an asshole. Like, you're just imposing your conception of what's good and what's bad onto other people by trying to epically own them or something. That's a toxic behavior. That's an antisocial behavior, and it's bad. But I think if you approach it in this non-judgmental way at an appropriate time, and you're willing to kind of play devil's advocate with how you frame things, then you're good to go. One of the things that I love to do, and I used to do this with my ex-wife in my videos, I would try to make arguments which built up the points that they were making, right? So they could get better at arguing for the things that they believed. Or I would recommend thinkers which I totally disagree with that are more in line with what they think, because they would probably like them. In some of those discussions that we had, you'd see me just sort of asking her a series of questions and then trying to explain her point for her that I completely disagreed with, and then she'd be like, yeah, just like that. That's what I'm trying to say. I mean, it's nice to see people have that reaction, right? It's a nice thing to see from somebody else, because it's like you're actively making them happy by empathizing with their train of thought and being able to put their train of thought into words which they may not possess at the time. They may not be able to wield at that time. And so I really think it's a much better approach to a discussion. Actually, what I described just now, literally just now, I don't think that's even being a contrarian except to oneself. If anything, I feel like that's being agreeable. So maybe I just think being agreeable is good. Maybe this has nothing to do with being a contrarian at all. Maybe I'm literally not one of those. But it's a thing I've found myself, saying about myself for so long. I'm a contrarian. I love to be contrary. But maybe more so what I'm attempting to point at when I say that is a anti-authoritarian impulse. I like learning about things that I'm told you shouldn't learn about, that you shouldn't know about. I like researching the minds of the depraved and the evil to figure out what their internal motivations were for how they became that way. I like kind of philosophical questions and subjects that are edgy and out there. Because it feels like this knowledge is stuff that you're not supposed to engage with, or it's taboo. And I guess that's the most contrarian thing about me, is that I like to do that. I'm thinking about this more. See, this is what I mean when I say I'm actually contrarian towards myself, is I'll start to explain all these different things. I'll see the flaws in my reasoning, then I'm like, oh yeah. That's actually not true at all, what I've been saying and what I've identified as for years now. But that's the attitude you gotta have. You gotta be contrarian towards yourself, because you grow from that, right? There are patterns of thinking I had which were super not helpful, and through trying to question my own biases and actually entering some of these conversations with very disagreeable people, I've managed to get out of that. But it's not to say I'm some fucking philosopher king or something, right? There are situations in which every person gets mad or personal or falls prey to their emotional impulses. But the goal here, the goal that I've had for a long time now, is to try and minimize those instances as much as possible, and have that conscious part of my brain take the reins, that front part take the reins and assess things. It's actually part of why I like language learning so much. It's like my Spanish brain is more logical than my English brain, because it's not, it's not my native language. So the executive functioning, which is required to maintain that language and articulate things in it, is going to be a lot. You need a lot of processing power to do that, and you also need a lot of processing power to think about cognitive biases, to think about argumentative fallacies, and to attempt to actively apply this knowledge and avoid some of those logical problems that you might fall into. So I guess that was a brief history of me not being a contrarian. I'm trying to think now, because I feel like there's a lot of different things that this relates to. Like when I was a kid, I did not like to listen to authority, but I also wanted approval from certain authority figures. I just wanted it for like me doing the things that I felt to be natural. I had this complex about being good. I really, really wanted to be seen as good rather than bad, because I, in many instances, saw myself as bad. Or at least I saw myself being defined that way by people around me who ostensibly were supposed to love me. And what I would do in response to that was to continue doing the things that I was told not to do. Element is making sounds in the background, so I'm lowering the volume. I would find myself like doing things which I was told not to do, which I was, inspiring that ire in others through. At least that's what they wanted me to believe, and continued to be reprimanded for doing so. But I would press forward, because I felt like I was in the right. I had a conviction, or a set of convictions, and I thought I was being mistreated, and that being something that I believed was not going to go away. I wasn't going to let those people break me. And come to think of it, that's actually probably the most contrarian thing I've done, because I grew up in a very isolated community, to the extent that I even had any community. It was pretty much just, my immediate family, because I was homeschooled for much of my life, and I was disagreeable, I was argumentative, I wanted to do things my way, and I refused to concede unless I thought it was reasonable. And usually what led me to thinking something was reasonable was if these authority figures were being nice to me, and if they framed it like, this is really something that could help you, or, this makes me feel really bad, so you could really help me if you did this. Like those sorts of framings, if it could be framed as like something that could help me, or something that I should do because otherwise it would hurt them, then, I was more likely to go along with the thing. Those were always my soft spots. But in general, if it was like you don't know what you're talking about, you have no idea, boy, all this stuff that I usually got, I didn't give a fuck about that. Like, I thought that I was right and everybody else was wrong. So I was going to stay steadfast in that belief. But so many of the other kids I've known, and the people I've met as adults who talk about their experiences, it's like they showed this deference towards the adults in the room, or people with some position of authority, and I didn't. It's like when you're in America, you hear all the time from other authority figures and also from cultural figures and even just from knowing your own history, this idea that what you think is best, what you want is best, what you're searching for in life is the most important, and that you should rely on yourself first and foremost. These are pivotal ideas in our culture which are imparted onto really all of the children who grow up here. And so, if you genuinely believe that, like if that is a sentiment that you have learned and hold, then you're not going to follow the crowd, right? Like you're not going to listen to these other things the authorities are telling you. You're going to feel like, well, what I believe is actually right, and that's what I need to follow through on. And that is absolutely how I function, in this life still. It isn't to say that I don't care about shared spaces, that I don't take into account the feelings of others. I always do, but that is a part of my belief system. Like I'm not doing that because the government or somebody else told me. It is because these are conclusions which I have individually arrived at, and they're based on feelings that I individually hold. And so, I think that's an important distinction. It's an important dynamic to think about. It's like, are you a leader or a follower? I've been asked that question when I was in school, and I said, well, you have to kind of be both. Most other people said that they wanted to be a leader. Very few, some said they wanted to be a follower, and I said, no, well, you have to be both. You have to start out as a follower to learn things from people who lead, and you become a leader yourself, but you also have to kind of be a leader from the beginning in your own life. You have to lead yourself to in the direction that you'd like to go. And only you can really know what that is. So you need components of both in order to be successful. And that was the answer that the teacher most liked. They most liked my answer because it is a multifaceted thing. And independence, like true independence, is going to include some advice and counsel from others who know things that you don't know. And that's also part of why understanding cognitive biases and the like is so important. It's because there are forces which exist in our minds which in some ways are beyond our control, but in other ways we just have to train in order to address them and to see things in this more rational way. That's the goal. That is the aspiration which I have, and I'm going to keep fighting in furtherance of, hopefully for the rest of my life.